I'm going to be talking about a somewhat unique topic, something that I haven't really spoken about before. And what that is, very specifically, is the future of Dharma. The future of Dharma. And the reason why I felt that this was important to speak about is this. Very often, this is the case both on the university level, with academia, but this also tends to be the case even with individuals who are Hindu, who practice Dharma. Very often, interestingly, when we think about Dharma, when we think about Hinduism, when we think about anything quote-unquote Vedic, what do we tend to think of? We tend to think of the past. We tend to think of radically the past, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, the most recent maybe 2,500 years ago. But more than this, we tend to think about something that is relegated to the past. In other words, something that doesn't really apply to us today. And then, of course, what to speak about the future. It's unfortunate that in this time of scientific modernity, we tend to have this false idea that as we progress historically, we tend to leave religion and spirituality behind. And of course, we've seen that in the last, especially 20 years or so, the opposite has actually been the case. If anything, we've tried all throughout the history of the 20th century to live without religion. What we've had throughout the 20th century as a century without religion has been the most bloody century that humanity has ever known. What we've seen has been ideological conflict. What we've seen have been revolutions and wars. What we've seen have been attempts to create nation states in which God has been absent from the center of the nation state, the very concept of the nation state. We've seen the Soviet Union. We've seen communist nations. We've seen fascism. We've seen all sorts of attempts to create paradises on earth. But again, with the state or with a dictator or with an ideology in the center rather than God. And what we've seen throughout the 20th century, what is now the last century, has been misery. What we've seen is so much death, so much destruction in the name of politics, in the name of economics. And now, of course, what people are recognizing on every level and in every nation in the world is that unless we indeed have spirituality in the very center of what we're doing, what we will have instead will be misery, will be death, because spirituality is life. What spirituality means is celebration of consciousness, celebration of life, celebration of who we are as spirit. When we negate this, when we deny this, when we deny God, when we deny ourselves as spiritual beings, well, what is the opposite of life? It's death. So as a result, the culture, one could say, of the 20th century especially, has been a culture of death, a culture of celebration of death. Well, again, the truth of the matter is spirituality certainly is something that was recognized as being of central importance in the past. It's something that's of importance to us now, but more than this, my prediction, and it's not just my prediction alone, the prediction of anyone in this world who has any spiritual inkling to them whatsoever, is that spirituality itself is going to form the very core of civilization itself in the immediate future. That rather than religion dying, as Marxists prayed that it would, rather than religion dying, on the contrary, religion itself might die, but spirituality, that is, the idea of experiencing the presence of the divine and then manifesting what it means to have that presence of the divine within us, that is going to come to the forefront of all civilization. Now, as I say this, you notice that I make this indeed distinction between religion and spirituality. And there is, in fact, a distinction between the two. And in order for us to understand precisely the role that spirituality and that Dharma will play in the future in a very practical way, it's important for us to understand this distinction. Of course, when we speak of spirituality in the pure sense, we're speaking of Sanatana Dharma. We're speaking of Sanatana Dharma, the eternal natural way. This is a very interesting term, Sanatana Dharma. This is a Sanskrit term. And what it means specifically is Sanatana means that which is eternal, that which never comes to an end. And then Dharma means very simply the natural way. And by the natural way, what is meant, of course, is a spiritual way, but a way that transcends denominationalism. You know, Dharma existed before we had the idea of my religion versus your religion. Before we had the idea that what it meant to be religious was what church, what religion are you a member of. When we talk about the various religions that exist today, and let's talk about just the various world religions that exist today, all the major world religions, you know, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and then some of the smaller ones, Sikhism, Jainism, etc. These, of course, are religions, all of which are recent. Even Hinduism, in the modern sense, is actually a recent thing. We were talking about this in the car on the way here, that there's a difference between Sanatana Dharma versus Hinduism. You know, Hinduism is this confused mixture, unfortunately, of a little bit of Indian culture with a little bit of some understanding of Sanatana Dharma, with a lot of other influence kind of in there, and just this muddled confusion, which is different from Sanatana Dharma, which is scripturally based truth, which is eternal. These religions all express denominationalism, and denominationalism is something that actually in history is very recent. You know, when we think about these world religions, we tend to think that they've all been around forever and that this is always the way it was. The truth is, denominationalism is no more than 2,500 years old. It's literally 2,500 years old. The first instance of it in the East was Buddhism, and in the West, Judaism, actually. But previous to these, there was no sense of denominationalism. There simply was truth, and you lived either in accordance with truth or not. And that truth was sometimes culturally expressed, you know, expressed in different ways culturally, but not denominationally. So the truth is, what we need to do, and this will be radical, both in concept but also in practice, denominations are going to come to an end. That simple. Denominations are going to come to an end altogether. I don't think I had a chance to tell other people this, but I told you in the parking lot of the temple how it was the strangest thing when I woke up this morning. Right before I woke up, I had the most vivid dream, an amazing dream, and it was somewhat detailed, but the important thing was what happened toward the end. I was giving a talk, and yeah, I don't know, I forget who I was giving a talk to. Maybe it was a small audience, maybe it was millions, I don't know. But I was explaining to them what the golden age is going to look like. And one of the things I remember saying is, and denominations are going to come to an end and be replaced instead by the natural way. You know? But we are literally going to see this. In fact, we're seeing it now, aren't we? In a way. You know, those of us who you know, are old enough to remember what it meant to belong to a religion 40 years ago. You were strict about this. Oh, if you were Catholic, you were Catholic. And you could not enter into even a Protestant church. You know, if you were Muslim, you could not enter into a Hindu temple. If you were Hindu, you couldn't do this. You know, there was this strictness that was there. These barriers that existed that are disappearing. So even now, we see all around us that now there's interfaith dialogue that's taking place that wasn't there even 40 years ago. This idea that, yes, you know, my official religion may be such and such, but wow, when I listen to you speak, it sounds like what I believe, regardless of what I call myself and what you call yourself. We see these barriers disappearing. The people whose vested interest it is to keep the barriers up religiously are, of course, the corrupt leaders of these religions. It's in their interest to make sure that people have these firm barriers and demarcations. This is your religion, everyone else is evil. But the people know better, and increasingly are knowing better. The people know that, yes, we may call ourselves Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, but the truth is, what's important is not what we call ourselves, but what we are within. What's important is, again, with what you believe, with what you are doing, with what you are practicing, are you elevating yourself or doing the opposite? Are you bringing more love, more compassion, more light in the world, or its opposite? And that's what's important regardless of what you call yourself, and more, that's Dharma. That's Dharma. And when we understand it in this sense, what sect is that? When a person chooses, this is a situation where it could be embarrassing for me to tell the truth, but I'm going to tell the truth anyway. They're being more dharmic than its opposite. So this is why, again, we can understand that when we talk about dharma, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about something that's living. We're talking about, again, a natural way which elevates us. If we wanted to understand dharma in a nutshell and in practice, it's this simple. That which elevates us and makes us healthier and more whole, spiritually, health-wise, intellectually, culturally, in any way that we can think of, that is dharma. Anything that makes us less healthy, less whole, etc., is the opposite of dharma. And when people begin to finally have this understanding, denominations as they exist today are going to come to an end. Exactly, the mindset will change. Right now the mindset for quote-unquote religious people is what? Again, it's this compartment. This is my religion. These are my core set of theological beliefs that I must believe. Anyone who does not fit into this box, they are outside the box. I have nothing to do with them. They have nothing to do with me. Only in this box is there the truth. That's how we see it today. The walls of the box are going to collapse. Before we had any sort of idea of religion dividing us as individuals, dividing us as peoples, as nations. Before we had this, we had dharma. And when we speak about dharma, dharma is something that certainly is universal. It applies to all people at all times. It is something that is eternal, thus it is sanatana. But more than this, it is something that cannot be hidden. It's kind of like the sun. Dharma is very, very much compared to the sun all throughout the scriptures of Sanatana Dharma, where when the sun is shining, a cloud might come temporarily, cover up that sun. But is the sun really affected by that cloud? Of course not. The sun is there. The sun cannot be affected. Rather, what's affected is our vision of that sun, and even then, only temporarily. In the same way, truth is something that cannot be affected by anything that we do in this world. It has its separate, independent, transcendent existence. It has its own reality. Dharma has its own reality. And it cannot be affected by anything that happens here, by the wars that take place, cannot even be affected by whether or not we choose to believe in it. And that's the most amazing thing. That's the most amazing thing. At certain times, we have more of a grasp of Dharma than at other times. However, regardless of anything, Dharma still is there, always. Always. Well, Dharma. When we speak of the idea of Dharma, first we have to understand what Dharma is. Dharma is the natural way. Dharma are the natural laws that are there, inherent in the very structure of the cosmos. But more than this, Dharma is the grace of God. Dharma is the grace of God as that grace becomes transformed in such a way that we can then have access to it in this world. We know that there are two ways in which we can deal with people. For example, if a person is a judge, there are two ways in which a judge can deal with someone who's there before them in their court. They can either deal with them in a mode of justice, in which they simply follow the letter of the law strictly, or they can deal with them with mercy. They can deal with them with mercy. Well, of these two, God actually deals with us only through mercy, only through love, only through compassion. Because in the spiritual realm, this is all that exists. And this sometimes surprises people when I tell them this. In the spiritual realm, in a state of perfection, is there a need for law? There isn't. In a state of perfection. In a state of perfection where everyone is functioning in accordance with who and what they are within, when they are functioning spiritually, when they are functioning purely and perfectly ethically, when there is not even the possibility of performing the opposite of what is good, then what's the use of law? Rather, the way that relationship takes place is through love, is through compassion. And from God's perspective, God is ever perfect. You see, God never comes down from the perfect. That being the case, God only deals with us through love and through compassion and through mercy. However, being in this world, this being a world of laws, that is the material realm, that mercy, that grace becomes transformed in such a way that we can then access it. That is Dharma. That is Dharma. At one time, the entire earth was ruled in accordance with Dharma. And what's interesting is, of course, when we tend to think of Dharma, we tend to think only of India, and this is a mistake, because truthfully, even for those individuals who do tend to think that that's the case, we still have this inkling when you look at the scriptures that in actuality at one time the entire earth was indeed run in accordance with Dharma. This term Dharma is known by many different words in many different cultures, in many different languages, but this central concept of there being a natural way, a natural law that transcends human concern, that transcends human belief. This is something that we find in every single culture on earth. What we've seen, of course, is that progressively, as the Kali Yuga has started roughly 5,100 years ago, and as things have gone on, has there been a receding of Dharma? Well, yes, there has. Have people been following Dharma less and less? Yes, they have. Have fewer and fewer cultures had a good understanding of what Dharma is, and thus try to run their societies in accordance with Dharma? Yes, that's been the case. To the point where today we can actually say that Dharma has actually reached its darkest point, where the world has actually reached its darkest point, where it seems that people are following Dharma probably less than they ever have in the history of humanity. This is true on the one hand, negatively. On the other hand, positively, there is a need for Dharma and there is a thirst for Dharma, for spirituality, the likes of which the world has never seen. And what we see is that very practically, Dharma in its practice, even if not perfectly in its understanding yet, in its practice, it is exploding in popularity throughout the world. What we see is that the technology of Dharma is being followed by more and more individuals, by more and more people. What we see is that yoga has become incredibly popular all throughout the entire earth. There is literally no nation that you can go to on earth, including China, including North Korea. No, not South Korea, North Korea. You can go literally anywhere and you will find yoga classes. Anywhere. You can go anywhere and you will find people pursuing meditation, practicing meditation on a day-to-day basis. Here in America, 18 million people do yoga. More than that, practice meditation. Vegetarianism has exploded also in popularity to the point where I believe it's 3% of the American population are vegetarian, and that's growing and growing and growing. What we find is that natural health, which also has its roots in Sanatana Dharma, has exploded. Isn't this true? Has exploded in the last several years. We were talking about this in the car on the way here, how even 15 years ago, the idea of an MD, of a doctor, prescribing to someone massage therapy was unheard of, even 15 years ago. Now it's covered by insurance. Now it's covered by insurance. Now doctors will recommend to people, I think you should see an acupuncturist for this, or I think you should take these herbs. The idea of natural medicine, which itself finds itself rooted in Sanatana Dharma, again, has exploded in popularity. So what we are seeing is this transition that's taking place. As we are sitting here in this room today, we are actually witnessing a global transition that is about to take place. What we are beginning to experience is a transition in time, a transition of ages. We know that in Sanatana Dharma and all of the ancient cultures of the world, they talked about these yugas. They talked about these massive ages, one preceding the other, and then all of these ages proceeding in a cycle. And the cycle repeating itself over and over again. This is a concept that you find not only in Sanatana Dharma, but the Greeks and Romans talked about this. The Mayans talk about this. The Chinese, literally every ancient culture on earth talked about this idea of ages. And we know that these ages are very long, in some cases lasting for millions of years. This age, Kali Yuga, lasting for over 400,000 years. But what's interesting, and what some people might not know, is that within these grand spans of time that constitute a yuga, there also are smaller cycles within these yugas. So right now we're in the Kali Yuga, the darkest of ages, the age of conflict. But even within this Kali Yuga, which again lasts for over 400,000 years, there are many ages that occur. Again, within this greater scope of the yugas, and you have the four yugas, Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali Yuga. So you have these four yugas, and then of course it's a cycle. They repeat each other again and again. But even within one age, there are also many cycles that occur, and that's true for all the ages. So in this Kali Yuga very specifically, there are definitely certain times that are better than others. So yes, this is one of those little mini cycles within the greater cycle. The golden age this golden age is going to last for 10,000 years. After that, again, things will slowly decline again, but then there will be a height again, not quite as high as this golden age. This is going to be the best of the golden ages within the Kali Yuga. Yeah, until eventually, again, it's kind of like this. If you can envision, I'll do it this way so you can see. If you can envision Kali Yuga progressing this way, but then golden age, but then down, then another golden age, but then down. And it's like you still have golden ages, but they're not quite as great until finally you reach indeed rock bottom. That's when Kalki comes. That's when Kalki comes. Because, again, it will come to the point where things will become so degraded in roughly 420,000 years from now, to the point where another even mini golden age is literally not even a possibility. So at that point, Kalki comes as a full avatar of God, and he reestablishes the actual Satya Yuga, the grand yuga or age. Yeah, but truthfully, yes, within each yuga there are cycles like that, ups and downs. We can even see them just in history. There are certain ages that are better than others. Oswald Spengler was a famous German historian in the 1920s. He wrote a book called The Decline of the West, and he showed himself in 2 volumes how even if you look at just the history of the last 2,000 years, you can see civilizationally how there are certain civilizations which will come into being. They reach a certain height, the golden age of that civilization. They go down, they disappear, replaced by another civilization. The Greco-Roman civilization, the Chinese civilization before that, and all these civilizations are almost like living beings. In fact, he considers them to be living beings. This was a German historian. What's interesting, a lot of people don't know this, of course I know this, he actually studied Hinduism. And that's where this historian got his ideas from. He also believed in the cyclical nature of ages, but he had studied Hinduism and he had studied the Yuga theory. So this is where he got his ideas from. But he, in a very, again, scientific academic way, he applied it to the last 2,000 years of history. And he himself, the reason why his famous book is called The Decline of the West is because his thesis was that Western civilization is now on the decline, and it's going to be replaced by something. As far as what he was, he gave a few hints, but he wasn't very clear. Of course, in Dharma we know it's going to be replaced by a global civilization, not merely a parochial civilization, not just a civilization in one continent or part of a continent. But yeah, this is going to be a global civilization. What the transition of the ages, what brings about the transition of ages is the collective consciousness of the people within that age. So why is it that, according to, again, all of the ancient cultures, not just Hinduism, why is it that we believe that as time progresses, things get worse, actually, not better? Why people become more degraded? Why is this the case? Why do the ages become degraded? Because people become degraded. Ages just reflect the consciousness, the collective consciousness of the people of that age. Similarly, if collectively we can elevate our consciousness, we will create a golden age. We will create a golden age. Interestingly, we are about to enter into a new age. And what's interesting is that this is spoken about in the Vedic scriptures, but more than this, it's spoken about in many of the cultures of the world. This is something that personally, as someone who has been studying, practicing Sanatana Dharma for 35 years, I myself have only come to terms with in the past maybe year and a half or 2 years. You know, who here has heard about this Mayan prophecy that, you know, in 2012, the age that we're in is supposed to end, and then what happens after that, people don't know because the Mayans didn't really talk about that. Have you heard about this, about 2012? Pretty much at this point, everyone has. And of course, as we get closer to 2012, more and more people will become aware of this. What's interesting is that the Mayans were not the only people to speak about this. When I began doing research, it amazed me to realize that the Vedas say the exact same thing. In fact, very specifically in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, there is a conversation that takes place between Krishna and Ganga, you know, the Ganges River personified as a goddess. And in this conversation that takes place, Krishna tells Ganga Mata, 5,000 years from this date, within the span of the Kali Yuga, there will be a respite from this terrible age. There will be a golden age of 10,000 years. And he says this quite literally, 10,000 years that will begin from 5,000 years from this exact moment. Now what's interesting is Vedic astrologers, people who know calendars very well, have done calculations on this. And we know now when this is supposed to begin. Again, according to Krishna in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana. And guess what the date is? It's February of 2013. February of 2013. And this is the amazing thing. The Mayans, their calendar ends December 21st, 2012. According to the Vedic astrologers, and according to, again, the words of Krishna himself in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, a golden age is supposed to start 3 months after that, February of 2013. Now think about this. Both of these calculations were done at least 5,000 years ago, number one. Number two, they're done by two civilizations that were existing quite literally on opposite sides of the earth, India and South America. And yet, they both say the same thing, and they differ by a period of 3 months. 3 months. You know, and truthfully, you could really even say it's not even a difference in a way, because, again, the Mayan calendar says the old age will end December of 2012. Krishna says the new age, the golden age, will begin February of 2013. So truthfully, they're both correct. One age has to end before another age has to begin. So what is amazing is that we are indeed in a time of transition right now. As we sit here in this room, we know it. We can feel it. We know that the earth has changed. We know that we're going through a period the likes of which no one has ever experienced before. We know that everything that's happening around us in the news is the result of this transition of ages that's about to begin. Because also we know from the Vedic scriptures that when there is this transition from one era to another era, it's never a smooth transition. Rather, first there has to be a dark storm before then the sun comes out again. And that's precisely what we're going through. That's precisely what we're going through with the economic problems that we're experiencing, with the political uncertainties that we're experiencing, with the social degeneration that we've experienced all throughout the world. All throughout the world. You know, that I don't even want to go into, because all you have to do is read the newspapers and see how degraded our children have become. See how degraded society has become. See how horrible our values have truly become. What to speak of spirituality being in the center of our culture, even being human, has barely been in the center of our culture. Unfortunately, the way we behave with one another, how materialistic, how greedy, how angry, how violent we've become as a people, you know. So we know that in many ways we are living in dark times, and things only are going to get worse. Yes, we are indeed living in very important times right now. This is a time the likes of which has not existed before. We see all of these problems that we're experiencing, and what we are actually experiencing right now is a time of pralaya. I'm sure many people have heard this word pralaya. It's that time in between ages. And in between ages, there's often a time of strife. That's what pralaya means. And this time began actually in December of 2004. This began with the tsunami that devastated South Asia, and 250,000 lives being taken. When we have a pralaya, the way that we know that we're having this is floods. Beginning with that flood, beginning with the flood that destroyed an American city of New Orleans, and then the floods that affected the Midwest. The Vedic scriptures are very clear about this. When a new age is about to appear, you will know, because there will be flood. You will know because there will be bad things that will occur. However, we need to know that these bad things are very temporary. They're very temporary. And again, it's merely a transition of ages. What is about to occur in the next several years, in the next 5 years, is why I'm talking about this, the future of Dharma. What we are going to see is something that we can scarcely even imagine. What we are going to see is indeed Dharma. Dharma itself as the natural way. Again, not as some sectarian thing, not as some denominational phenomena, but Dharma, meaning truth and spirituality, is going to become the center of our future civilization. As the world gets smaller and smaller, as borders continue to crumble around us, as it gets easier and easier for us to travel, we are indeed going to become a global civilization. But what is going to be the center politically, ideologically of that global civilization? Is it going to be merely materialism? Is the whole idea that the reason why we have a world and why we are continuing to advance our technology and to do all the wonderful things that we're doing, is it merely to make money? Is it merely to just enjoy? Is it merely so that we can have 1,000, 10,000 instead of 600 cable channels to look at? Is it merely all these things, or is there a higher purpose? And there is indeed a higher purpose. What we're going to experience is going to be truly, as Krishna says, a golden age. Now, what does this mean? What does this look like? What this means is that Dharma is going to become the center of politics. It's going to become the center of economics. It's going to become the center of culture. It means that the judicial system is going to be reordered in accordance with Dharma. Everything. And this may come as a shock to some people. If we understand Dharma, it shouldn't at all, actually. And for those of us, especially from India, you should be proud of this. It shouldn't shock you. And in fact, when I say all this, I'm not talking about merely India. Dharma is going to become the center of all human culture. And what's amazing is it's going to do this without war. It's going to do this without needing to convert anyone. It's going to do this, in fact, not even through the traditional vehicle of religion. It's going to do so spiritually. It's going to do so because all people on this earth, regardless of their culture, regardless of their race, regardless of their language, regardless of their national background, all human beings want to know God. All human beings want to know themselves. All human beings want to have meaning in their lives. And meaning more than just, what am I going to be doing for the next week? All people want to know, what is the meaning of my life? All people want to have happiness in their life. And it's for this reason that people are going to embrace Dharma. And again, when I say embrace Dharma, I'm not talking about conversion. On the contrary, I'm talking about embracing nature, embracing who and what they truly are within, embracing truth. Embracing truth. So this is what the future holds for all of us. It's this global transformation that's about to take place. There are a few things I want to talk about very specifically. Dharma is going to affect politics. Oh yes, let there be no doubt about that. Dharma is going to affect economics. It's going to affect everything. The sciences, literally everything we can think about. However, it's going to affect these things from a spiritual perspective. So this is the thing. There are already other people doing their politics. Let them do their politics. There are already people, playing with economics, trying to fix the situation that we're in. There are people in every other realm trying to do whatever they think is good to help the world. However, spiritually, there's almost no one. We are lacking spiritual leadership more than anything. So what we need to focus on now is we need to be the spiritual gurus of the world. That's what the world is lacking, you know, and in that way guide politics. See, what are brahmanas? Not in the caste sense, in the true sense of the varna. What is the brahmana? The brahmana is the individual who guides politics. But how? By being apart from it, you know. They guide economics, they guide all these things, but from a spiritual perspective. You have Chanakya Pandit. You know, everyone here, I'm sure, you know, everyone from India knows Chanakya Pandit. What did he do? He was a brahmana in, again, the pure sense, meaning a spiritual person. He guided the state. He guided Chandragupta Maurya, you know. But how? He himself stood back. He himself was a spiritual person. He himself didn't engage in politics. And in fact, when Chandragupta finally was successful and drove the Greeks out of India, what did he do? He retired. And he went back into the forests, you know, and was a teacher again. So in the same way, that's how we're going to affect the world, you know. So I wouldn't get involved in personally in, you know, protests or things like that. However, philosophically, we can guide people who are idealistic in such a way that, yes, if they're going to engage in protest, make sure they're protesting the right thing. If they're going to run for office, make sure they're running for the right thing and with the right ideas. And that's what we're going to do. We are going to see dharmis run for office. You know, we're going to see within the scope of the next 50 years a prime minister of Great Britain who was a follower of Sanatana Dharma. We're going to see this. We're going to see a president of the United States who follows Dharma. What we are meant to do is to guide them in the right direction. Remember this day. Especially those who are skeptical here about this. Remember this day. Within the next 50 years, we're going to see the entire world become dharmic. It's all of the above. It is God's grace. It's the natural transition of ages. It is individuals on a personal level choosing to become more spiritual, thus affecting the collectivity of consciousness in that age. It is the grace of divine beings, the devas and the devis. It's everything. It's all the above. It's, as you've heard me say before, spiritually, it's the coming together of the perfect storm. What we're going to see in the course of the next 4 to 5 years is the coming together spiritually of the perfect storm. All the elements coming together perfectly and coinciding in such a way that the world as we know it is going to shift. Even the physical terrain is going to shift. Even the physical terrain is going to shift. Everything is going to shift. The way it is ideally, again, using Chanakya as a good example, the way it should be is that spirituality influences politics, you know. So in other words, politics is influenced for the good. What does this mean? This means that you have pure individuals who have pure thoughts, pure ideas, pure motivations, who then try their best to influence politicians in such a way that they themselves will be as pure as a politician can be, you know, as pure as a politician is capable of being. But instead we have it the other way around. Now politics has entered everything. Politics has entered religion, has entered literally everything. Academia, you know, everything. You want tenure, it's politics. Everything, politics. You know? Yeah, exactly. Sciences, yeah. Yeah, you can't do science now without politics involved. And, you know, what does that do? That kills the ideal. That kills idealism. Instead, it should be the other way around. Politics, you know, should... ideally, in a Vedic society, politics is kept to a minimum as much as possible. The political sphere, the political and the economic sphere are actually considered to be the least important spheres. The most important are the spiritual and the cultural. Yeah. You know, in the Republic, Plato says something to the effect that you know, when we have either politicians who are pure philosophers or when philosophers enter into politics and become rulers of society, then we'll have paradise. Philosophers meaning wise people, people who have true wisdom. So that's what we're missing. Again, what we're missing is leadership. But that leadership is going to arise very quickly. Empowered people, people who are empowered, are going to arise in the next several years. And many of them can be here right now to make this world into a wonderful place for our children, for our children's children. See, this is the thing. We do so much for our children, don't we? We all have children. And we do things to benefit our children, don't we? Of course. It's a silly question. But what do we do to benefit our children? We try to help them in the more immediate sense. We give them an education. We make sure they're healthy. We try to give them our good advice, etc. But what if we do all this? Let's say we make sure, yes, they get the best education in the world. Yes, they marry the perfect wife or husband. Yes, yes, yes. Materially, they have all these things. But then the world around them is a living hell. Have we helped our children? No. No. It is also incumbent upon us, if we truly care about our children, to help our children specifically, but to also make sure that when they graduate from Harvard with that MD, the world is not on fire. That there aren't riots going on in the street, that there isn't poverty, that there isn't, just a horrible, horrible situation. So if we truly care about our children and our children's children and their children, yes, let's send our kids to Harvard. Yes, let's do that. Let's make sure they're the healthiest children in the world. Let's make sure they have everything that they need in the immediate sense. But let's also try to make sure that when they are where we are today, at our age, that they're living in a world of peace. That they're living in a world of peace, of happiness, where people aren't killing each other, where they are not just wealthy and they have their wonderful home and their BMW, and yes, I am Dr. So-and-so who graduated from Harvard, but they also have happiness. Because trust me, I know my fair share of MDs from Harvard. And many of them are the opposite of happy. So in addition to having all those wonderful things, we also want to make sure that they're happy. And they can't be happy if they are living in a world where there's just meaninglessness around them. Prabhupada, I'm sure everyone here has heard of the famous Prabhupada. Wonderful person. People usually associate him with the Hare Krishna movement. No, he transcends the Hare Krishna movement. He's not merely the founder of the Hare Krishna movement. He was himself maybe the greatest saint of the 20th century because of what he did. What he did was traverse the entire earth and initiate 5,000 Videshis as Brahmanas. No one was able to do that. No one. He said something very interesting when he talked about the future and this future global civilization that's going to come, because he spoke about this too. Every great saint does. He said something truly fascinating. He talked about this in the context of Bharat versus America. Bharat, India versus America. And this is the example that he gave. He said that Bharat was like a lame man, a man who can't walk. America is like a blind man, a man who can't see. Now, what did he mean by this? Well, what he meant, of course, was technologically, as far as material progress, yes, India has still some way to go. So this is how India is hampered. Whereas the West, of course, materially, we're doing great. At least until now, we were doing great. But, we have all the material technology, all the wealth, etc. Whereas India still was striving for this. However, America was blind spiritually. America had been blinded by the glitter of all its technology, all of its consumer products, all of these different things. Well, this is the analogy that he gave. When you have a blind man and you have a lame man, what can they do? They help each other. The blind man takes the lame man, puts that man on his shoulders. That person can see. That person guides the way. And the blind man at least can walk. So he'll carry them both. Well, in the same way, in the future, what we're going to see is this coming together of Bharat and America very specifically in this way. This healthy, wonderful harmonization of technological excellence on the one hand, but spiritual vision on the other. in such a way that it will save the entire world. You see, one of the hallmarks also of the 20th century, which is how I began this talk, talking about the conflicts of the 20th century, one of the hallmarks of the 20th century has been indeed conflict. Throughout the 20th century, up until recently, even extending up until now, the year 2009, what we've seen has been 100 years of conflict, gender conflict, men and women warring against each other, class conflict, the workers versus the capitalists versus the workers, racial conflict, ethnic conflict, ideological conflict. What Dharma is the opposite of conflict, and Dharma is going to bring all conflict to a close. Dharma is harmony. It's quite literally the opposite of conflict. What Dharma says is actually something fascinating. It says, are there differences between human beings? Yes, of course there are. See, it doesn't try to deny these differences artificially. It says, yes, there are men, there are women, they're different. There are different classes. Some people work with their hands. Some people are intellectuals. Some people are managers. Yes, people are all in different classes. Are there different races? Yes. Are there different languages? Yes. However, all of this diversity being the case, this is what Dharma teaches us. What we are meant to do is to bring about harmony, despite the diversity. You see? And this is the lesson that we have lost, and this is why there's been so much pain, so much suffering throughout the 20th century. Well, what we're going to see is indeed the Dharmatization and the harmonization of the entire earth, of the entire world, where all of these conflicts will come to a close. Why ultimately is there conflict? Because we falsely identify with these differences. We say, oh, I am a woman, and that's all I am. I am a man, and that's all I am. I am a worker, and that is the totality of my identity. I am white, I am Indian, I am Chinese, and this is all that I am. Therefore, being different from all others, they are all my enemy. See, when we identify only with the body, only with these limited identities, that's what causes war. That's what causes greed. That's what causes anger. Kama, krodha, lobha. That's what causes all of these problems. When, however, we learn that our essence is the same, when we have this samadarshinaha, to quote the Bhagavad Gita, when we have this equal vision, and we realize that, look at this room. Look in this room. Everyone, seriously, look around you. What do you see? You see diversity. You see Indians, non-Indians, men, women, younger people, older people. You see people who, if we got to really know each other, we'd find even more differences between us all. And yet, inwardly, we're all the same. We are united by Dharma, but then even deeper than this, spiritually, we're all the same. We're all Atman. We are all this consciousness that is already perfect in every way. That is beautiful, that is wise, that is good, because our Atman itself is a reflection of the Paramatman, of the Supreme Self of God. And this being the case, when we can then transcend this bodily vision and see things with the spiritual vision, that's when division, that's when conflict comes to an end. So we can see now how this is the very simple formula. And we can see how once people throughout the world understand this simple concept, that we are more than merely what our ego tells us that we are, and more we can govern society through Dharma in such a way that we govern naturally, that we govern in accordance with God's laws, that we govern our society not merely to exploit the people, but that we can actually have a government that reflects the will of the people and that actually serves the people. This is Dharma. And when we have this, we will have a perfect society. We will indeed have a golden age. Even in the golden age, of course, it's not that everything will be perfect. Humans are always going to be humans. However, this is the difference. We can see it in this way. The facilities for becoming perfect will be there, whereas they're not here now. You see, becoming perfect both individually, but then also socially as well. So in other words, even during the golden age, does that mean that no human being will lie? Does that mean that no person will steal? Does that mean that no person will ever express anger? No, of course not. That will still be there. However, Right now, even the facilities that are necessary for a person to transcend such behavior and to reach their full potential spiritually, it's not here now. And it will be there in the future. Now, how do we bring this about? Because is this age going to come? Yes, it's going to come. It's going to come whether we like it or not. And hopefully I would think most people in this room would like that. But frankly, whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. However, we can help to bring it about. We can help to make this a smooth rather than a traumatic transition. How do we do this? Every time a person decides to shop at Whole Foods versus Walmart, they're being more sattvic, more dharmic. Every time a person makes a choice that I'm going to eat something organic versus something that's fast food, they're being more dharmic from a health perspective. Every time someone makes the choice that, oh, here's a stranger walking my way, I'm going to smile rather than scowl, they're being more dharmic. We can do this by ourselves, living as if the golden age is here, the Satya Yuga. See, what's the Satya Yuga? Is it really something simply environmental? Is it simply an age in which people have no choice but to be good? No. Satya Yuga, like everything spiritual, begins from the within. You know? The sage is living in Satya Yuga, is living in the golden age, regardless of the actual age that they're living in. They carry the golden age within them because they are personifying Dharma perfectly. In the same way, we also can do this. We also can do this. What we are also going to see is going to be the arising of empowered leaders to bring about this golden age. And it's not going to be just one person. It's going to be many people. It's going to be many people. We are having a crisis of leadership throughout the world. This is true in Sanatana Dharma. This is true globally in every context. Isn't this the case? We don't trust our leaders. We don't trust our religious leaders. We don't trust our political leaders. Our cultural leaders, who are they? Britney Spears, you know. Who are they? We have no leaders. We are living in a leaderless society. And if we see the social body as analogous to a human body, to live without leaders is like having a body without a head. You're not going to live for very long if you literally don't have a head. What we are going to see in the next several years, we're going to see the arising of empowered leaders. You know, Krishna tells us, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bharata abhyutana madharmasya tadatmanam shrijamyaham. Krishna tells us that age after age, when there is a decline of dharma, when there is the arising of adharma, he himself comes, and he comes in order to once again set dharma in its course, to, and this is interesting, he uses this exact wording, to annihilate the adharmis, dushkritam, to annihilate those who are demonic in this world, the evil. He does this himself through his own incarnations, but he also does that through us. You know, on Tuesday I was giving a talk in my introduction to Hinduism class at the temple, the Hindu temple in Omaha, and someone asked a very interesting question, which people do ask me every so often. Understanding the idea of avatar, the idea that God, of course, comes at dark times. People will often ask me, well, aren't these pretty dark times? Why doesn't God come now? I mean, shouldn't we have an incarnation right about now if we understand this verse, yada yada hi dharmasya? And this is what I explained to this person on Tuesday, and this is what I explained to all people. Yes, God does come, and God is going to come now. However, God doesn't necessarily come in his full form. Rather, God empowers. God doesn't come as a Purna avatar, as a pure avatar himself. However, God empowers his people. So what we're going to see is that many of us are going to be empowered spiritually to not only help ourselves, but to save this world. And this is how this golden age is going to come about. How do we become empowered? Very simple. Make yourself a vehicle. Make yourself into a vehicle such that God can empower you. What does this mean? Sarva dharman parityaja ma'am ekam sharanam vraja Aham tvam sarvapabhyo moksha yashyami ma shuchaha. Krishna himself again in Bhagavad Gita says, simply surrender unto me. Abandon all of these lesser paths and simply surrender unto me. I will deliver you from all bad things. Do not fear. When we have the ability to rid ourselves of ego and to so surrender ourselves at the feet of Bhagavan, then he empowers us. Then he empowers us. I'm going to end this talk by giving this very, very beautiful, beautiful example. That one day, Radharani came to Krishna and she asked him, what is Krishna always doing? He's playing his flute. He's playing his flute. She asked him, you're always playing this flute. What has this flute done that it is so fortunate that it gets to touch the lips of God constantly and to have you blow your divine breath through it? What wonderful austerities, what prayers, in how many lifetimes has this little flute done that it is so fortunate that it literally has the ability to touch the lips of God? And Krishna says to Radharani, it emptied itself. It emptied itself. And what does this mean? Both literally and figuratively. Literally, if you have a flute, it has to be empty. It has to have that hole going through it, otherwise it doesn't serve any function. So it has to have that within it such that you can then use it. But also, we ourselves as devotees, we need to empty ourselves. We empty ourselves of ego. We empty ourselves of anger. We empty ourselves of greed. We empty ourselves of thinking that we are the center of the world. Ego. We empty ourselves of this such that then, in the same way that God blows his divine breath through that flute, God will fill us with his divine breath. That we also will be empowered by the divine, such that we can then do his work. Radharani, she understood that to serve this function as that flute was the greatest of all blessings. It's the greatest of all blessings. Why? That little flute, that little instrument is constantly with God. When it's not on his lips, he tucks it into his little belt and he keeps it next to him. And as a result, that flute is as famous as God is. In the same way, when we surrender our lives to God, we too become glorified. We have this idea that to surrender to God means that we negate ourselves. It doesn't. To surrender to God is actually the highest of things. It glorifies us more than anything in this world can. Just think of how we as human beings try to glorify ourselves, how we try to become famous. We get happy every time there's an article about us. We hire publicity people. We hire publicity people. Famous stars will hire agents. We try to make ourselves famous. Well, just think of how glorious we can truly be, that we will be a divine associate of God for eternity. Each one of us. God's expansiveness and the expansiveness of his love is such that each one of us, an unlimited number of us, can be next to God at all times. And yet God himself never feels the burden of this. That's what it means to be the infinite. And if we all want to be famous, think of that glory. Think of that glory. When we ourselves can understand this and can put this into practice in our lives, we too can become instruments, and we too can be empowered, and we can save the world. Each one of us. Each one of us. So this is the future of Dharma. This future is with us. Dharma, of course, will always exist. But we also have the ability to chase away those clouds. We are going to see the sun of Dharma rise in our lifetimes with a blinding light. With a blinding light, so glorious, so bright, that it's going to illumine the entire universe. And we will see this in our lifetime. So with that, thank you all very much. Namaskar.